Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Lunch and Learn of March for the Florida Native Plant Society. I'm Valerie Anderson, your Director of Communications and Programming, and I have with me Ryan Worthington and Jean Kelly. So since we're a little bit late to get started, we'll just let Ryan go on ahead.
Thanks, Valerie, and thanks for having me on. And Jean, it's a pleasure to meet you in person, so to speak. All right, so the presentation basically is on advocating for Florida's environment in 2025. As we know, we have a lot of challenges as the legislative session has kicked off, and there is a ton of bills that are flying around, and some of them aggressively are being pushed through. So this is basically a background on how the average Floridian can make a difference. So basically, it's going to be covering a base level of knowledge regarding influencing environmental issues at the state level, a short civics lesson, how to contact legislators and which methods are effective, and what issues are impacting our environment here in Florida. Okay, so basically what is advocacy? So it's basically when we become the voice of something. Now, our environment here in Florida does not make very good campaign contributions, and it has resources that a lot of other folks or organizations or special interests would definitely like to get their hands on. So when we choose to be the voice for the environment, we are definitely making a difference because it has a poor track record of defending itself. And why do we need to advocate? Well, we have 23 million folks in this state, and a lot of them are completely isolated from our natural areas. So I know the folks here at Florida Native Plant Society definitely have a connection to our natural environment. But say if you're living in the suburbs and you just get on the expressway and drive, to work, maybe stop at the grocery store on the way home, and your interaction with nature is probably the possums and the raccoons getting in your trash and being really annoying, and the armadillos digging up your lawn, you may not care much about it. So when these challenges present themselves and our natural areas are at risk, a lot of folks may not have that connection and may not feel compelled to advocate for it. And a lot of our government agencies here are influenced by political forces and special interests. So they may not consistently maybe operate in the environment's best interest. So last year, the primary example of this would be the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So the DEP, they are supposed to protect our environment. That is their you can see the mission statement right there. That is their job. But we can look at a number of things that they have done that's been counter to that. The main one was attempting to develop our state parks. So, I think many people remember that, putting the golf courses in Jonathan Dickinson, which is critical habitat. I wouldn't say critical, but very important habitat for a number of endangered and protected species, most notably the scrub jay. If you develop the scrub jay's habitat, it doesn't move elsewhere. Its population shrinks. So that's very important. But they're putting hotels on coastal parks and all kinds of things. Trade part of the Withlacoochee State Forest. So the Florida Native Plant Society, I think, was the first organization I can remember that came out and opposed this. But yes, there was a golfing community that wanted to add on to their golf courses, and right next door is part of the Withlacoochee State Forest, which ironically enough was put there to offset the development or a toll road in another area. And they wanted to get their hands on it. That just got kind of shot through by Secretary Hamilton of the DEP during a cabinet meeting. There was no discussion, no review, no nothing. It was very secretive. Another one was they intended to issue a permit for an exploratory oil well right next to the Apalachicola River. Now, the Apalachicola River is very unique to Florida. It's an alluvial river, so it's very sediment laden and brings like seeds and all kinds of things from up north. And as a result, it's one of the most biodiverse places in the United States. And it goes into the Apalachicola Bay. It's very important. And it's an outstanding Florida water, which means it gets additional protections. So when a company wanted to do an exploratory oil drilling right next to the river, and there was a slough that what it did was it went right next to the drilling platform and kind of connected to the river. So if there was any kind of discharge or spill or accident, it would have a straight shot into the river and the bay, and that would be terrible. So how come this would get the intent, get a permit so easy? I have no idea. And then the latest and greatest, which is bothering me a lot, is that Mosaic, the phosphate mining company. So when they mine for phosphate, they have two big byproducts: phosphogypsum, which is this mildly radioactive substance that they make mountains out of. And on top of those is processed water, which is basically hazardous waste as a byproduct of their mining. So it's like these mountains in Central Florida with these toxic water lakes on top. And they don't have a process, or they don't want to spend the money to responsibly deal with these, this hazardous waste. So they talk to the DEP, and they're trying to get a test well so they can just pump millions of gallons of this toxic waste deep underground, kind of out of sight, out of mind. I really don't feel very comfortable with that. But they just had a meeting this last Tuesday. So we'll see how that shakes down. And also we have the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, FWC. Now, they don't have as long of a laundry list, but definitely the one thing that got under my skin the most is Split Oak Wildlife Environmental Area. And what made this so bad is about a little over 31 years ago, Split Oak, that land was acquired to offset development in another area. It also has been an area for rehoming gopher tortoises. And some of that land was used by the money used to purchase that land was used by incidental take permits. And so what that was is when developers wanted to just develop over an area and they didn't want to rehome the gopher tortoises, they paid some money to the state and they were able to pave right over the burrows, entomb the gopher tortoises. The gopher tortoises would get a slow death. And after close to 100,000 of those permits being issued, the state decided that they didn't want to issue anymore. And that was from the early 90s, I believe, to the late 2000s. Some of those permits still exist, but the money raised from that blood money from those gopher tortoise permits was also used to buy Split Oak. So when the area around it got too valuable, instead of holding it in perpetuity like they promised, they did a little takesies backsies and then approved a toll road to go right through the middle of it. That is pristine, scrubby flatwoods habitat. Also, it requires prescribed fire to be maintained. And if you have a toll road and an expressway going through an area that requires prescribed fire, it's highly unlikely that habitat would be maintained as it should be. All right, so let's see. So special interests, they wield influence. So we are talking some of the companies now. Florida Power and Light, they've been engaged with. Those are some of the influences that we have on our environment. FPL, they basically they've done things like funding shell candidates that's subverting democracy, spying on journalists that spoke critically of them, and used media outlets to publish news stories that showed them in a positive light or attack candidates that did not want to be elected. So every time, if you're a Florida Power and Light customer and they were talking about a rate hike, some of the money was going through some of those activities. Scott's Fertilizer, they attempted to get some fertilizer ban restrictions. So sometimes local governments will say, hey, you know what? This fertilizer that we're putting on our ground, especially during the rainy season, is harming our local waterways. Think Indian River Lagoon with the submerged aquatic vegetation dying out, a lot of it from nutrient pollution. And that was starving hundreds of manatees to death. So when some local governments really come together and saying, this really isn't worth it, Scott's Fertilizer saw it differently. While they were not able to get a bill pushed through that would ultimately prevent any local government from instituting any kind of, any kind of controls that would protect water quality or quantity, they did get about a year-long prohibition for local governments from instituting any fertilizer bans. Johnson & Johnson, 2019, Key West found, looked at from NOAA, came out with a list of sunscreen ingredients that would harm our hard corals. And if anybody knows, the hard corals around the Keys are in dire straits, well under 10% of their historic range, like back as soon as the 1970s. So when they saw this, they wanted to ban sunscreens, not all sunscreens, but just the ones that had those ingredients. So there was plenty out there that do not, that are not harmful to coral. Well, Johnson & Johnson got involved, and a legislator from my neck of the woods up in Northeast Florida passed the Florida Drug and Cosmetics Act. And the narrative being pushed was that, we didn't want to be the cancer, state or anything like that. And it was acting like Key West was trying to do a complete ban. Well, that worked. And so now we do have what's called a preemption, where no local governments can institute any of that. And so that was where Johnson & Johnson came in and, it kind of subverted any protections for our corals that desperately need it. And of course, we got Mosaic. Backing laws allow them to dispose of waste that I just talked about, pumping that processed water underground. They could have potentially serious environmental consequences. 2 years ago, they had a radioactive roads bill that we called. It was being pushed through, allowing some of that phosphogypsum that they use as their byproduct to be used as a test road in Florida. And so that got approved. I think the EPA approved it as well. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a lawsuit possibly pending. So we'll see where that goes. But special interests will target laws to harm our environment when it suits their bottom line. So this is where advocacy comes in. The average Floridian has a lot of power, and probably Gene and maybe Valerie can attest to this, because this isn't Washington, D.C. Some bills do not have anybody that speaks out about them. They just fly right under the radar. So when Floridians speak up, it doesn't take as many to make a huge difference. So that is why each one of us raising our voice is extremely important.
We did have,
and also, yeah, I'm sorry,
we
go ahead.
A pretty pertinent question that I wondered if you might want to address.
Sure.
B asks, what defines local when you're talking about some of these bans? Does that include preempting city government's activities?
Yes. So when they do like a preemption, that means, city, county, anything less than the state. Usually it's preempted to the state level. And ironically, our legislatures will always complain about Washington, imposing their will on Tallahassee, and they grumble about it a lot, but they enjoy doing it to us all the time. Any other questions?
No, we have someone who asked us to support the right for clean water, specifically prior to the stringent qualifications for the collecting signature petitions and stuff like that might pass the legislature.
Yes, that is very important. It does give a legal standing to try and protect our water, but as maybe I've seen some rules and laws and everything else, that's the start of the fight. But it's definitely a great thing to have if it's able to go through. But as you said, right now, the governor and possibly the legislature, there's bills over there to restrict the process for getting things on the ballot. Because when Floridians actually, want to get stuff done that the legislature won't do, it tends to annoy them. All right, so advocating at the state level. I'm going to be talking about the state level, not so much local. And one reason I like doing that, because I'll use my social media to get issues out there, and anybody around the state can make a difference. If it's a local level, like at a county, or something or some kind of development issue with the county. Sometimes county commissioners will not care about Floridians speaking out that are outside of their county and not their constituent. So that's why I like advocating at the state level. So we're going to be talking, I'm going to try and push through this because it gets a little dry. We're going to do who passes bills, how a bill becomes law, the legislative session, why it's important, and what is a committee, and some examples. All right, so who passes the bills? The House, the Senate, and the governor are all involved. They have basically 8-year term limits with different terms. Senate and governor have 4. The House has 2. So I'm going to be talking about some issues, and it may seem like I'm maybe against the right on this or the Republicans, but that's just not the case. Personally, I could care less which side of the aisle a politician is on, as long as they're doing the right thing. And special interests will influence politicians on both sides, and I have seen that happen over and over again. The GOP does have a supermajority in Florida, so a lot of the laws getting pushed through, they are able to do that. Special interests do influence both sides, and then so I basically said all that. These are the House and districts. So we have 120 House seats and 40 Senate seats. So you can tell the more populated areas, they get a lot tighter. Orlando, Miami, Tampa. So the legislative session, we have a part-time legislative session. It's for 60 days a year. It just kicked off last week. We can have special sessions called by the governor to address issues that Governor DeSantis deems important. He's done that a number of times, and the legislature seems to be getting tired of it. They've been giving him a little bit of pushback. The regular session, though, is a high level of activity. So you have local governments, voters, special interests, everything descending on Tallahassee, trying to push things through. It gets very fast paced, and there are some guidelines on when, changes the law to bills or amendments can be filed, but sometimes they will intentionally wait until like the last minute on a Friday for something that's going to be heard on the first thing on a Monday. So we need to be very vigilant because if they do minimize the response time for us, if it's especially a very harmful issue to our environment, it makes it very difficult to respond. The other thing to do is we need to win every time to stop environmentally harmful bills. The one that really got under my skin most last year was one with auxiliary containers. We were able to barely defeat it in the Senate. And I'm talking, when I say we, I say environmental activists around the state. But it is back, and it is moving fast, unfortunately. So basically how laws are made. So there's a very long process from when a bill becomes an idea till where it's signed into law by the governor. What we're focused on is committee stops. So if you look at, you'll have like the House on top and the Senate on the bottom, and most bills will have about 3 committee stops. They can have as little as 2. I've seen, as much as 4. And each committee is a smaller group of lawmakers that will consider this bill. And if they don't find it favorable, that bill is dead. Now, to increase the chances for a bill going through, getting through the committee process into the House and on the governor's desk, they will file a companion bill, so if you have a representative, they'll find a senator that agrees with their idea and will file a bill to the exact same language, and it'll progress through the House or the Senate. So if one gets stopped in a committee in the House, maybe the Senate one will go through, and vice versa. So in order to influence the smallest number of legislators possible, the committee is where I tend to focus. And I think that is our best opportunity. If it gets beyond the committees, it's much more of an uphill battle when you have the entire House or Senate that you're dealing with, or even the governor. Let's see. So our committees are the best opportunity to make a difference. So what is a committee? A committee basically considers and votes on bills, usually around like a certain subject or a realm. So what we have here is the House Committee on 2025 on Natural Disasters, and on Environment and Natural Disasters, aptly named. And so this is 18 members of the House. The Senate one, which is the environmental, the Environment and Natural Resources, which is very similar, that only has 9 members. But yeah, they'll go through and they will vote on bills. So they do have the chair. Now, the chair of committees is very important because that's the gatekeeper. The chair decides which bills are going to be considered. These committees have way more bills to consider than they actually have time to during this legislative session. So a bill can be buried. That means it just gets thrown into the stack of bills and never heard. And if it does that, it's dead. It doesn't move. So the chair gets to decide who gets heard. and in what order. So we've seen some environmentally harmful bills last week on the first week of session get pushed through. That's a warning sign, because those are the high priority ones for the legislature. So that's something to keep in mind on these. So if they are not found favorable, if they get more nays and yays, that bill is done. So let's look at two examples that we had over the last few years. Last year, Senate Bill 1126, the regulation of auxiliary containers. So this was a fast-moving bill. It is back again, unfortunately. And this bill is very harmful because it basically strips all existing regulations that are in the state on single-use plastics. So think if you're at the beach and they don't want glass containers at the beach because they could break and get in the sand and cut up your feet, that would be gone at the local level. In the springs, Weeki Wachee, Rainbow, Ichetucknee, if those springs, they have basically limitations. You cannot have single-use containers in those springs. I've done cleanups in all of them, and I'm normally not finding any very little trash. Some of it's very old, stuff that's not made anymore, like old containers with pop tops. Most of what I find in those springs is lost belongings, shirts, hats, stuff like that. But through a very good advocacy, the bill, we had a senator that was over a lot of the springs who basically flipped when a lot of advocates came out and spoke out against it. And she was the deciding vote to make sure that bill didn't go through any further. A couple of years ago, we had House Bill 1145. Now, this was going to allow some local regulation of single-use plastics. It was filed, if I'm not mistaken, by a Republican, and it would allow coastal communities to have these pilot projects to restrict single-use plastics. It got completely buried, and the legislature ended up withdrawing the bill completely. Okay, so you may not, this is a lot to remember, but anybody can look up a bill. Thankfully, we have a very nice, easy to navigate system to get all the information you want. So if you, up on the upper right-hand corner, I don't have a laser pointer. I'm usually doing this live. You're going to see the track the bill. You can just basically enter in your email address, and if this bill gets assigned somewhere or passed favorably or whatever happens to it, it'll give you an email. It is great. And if you look below that, you'll see which committees it's going in. So you can see all the lawmakers that are considering that. You can read the bill, you can look at the bill history, and you can see the related bills at the bottom. That is the companion bill. So this one has a companion bill in the Senate. So this is Senate Bill 80, State Land Management, also known as the State Park Protection Act. And if I'm not mistaken, I saw Gene when I nerd out by watching these committees on my free time. You can watch the videos. Gene was out there speaking in favor of further protections that are desperately needed. Let's see, did I skip one? Okay, committees. So when I talked about the committees that basically that consider these bills, you can look at this committee. So we have one here. It shows you all the senators that are on it. You can track, you can give them your email, and they'll let you know what's going on with the committee. And you can see all their meetings. They'll have you an agenda, which you can click on, tells you what bills they're considering. Afterwards, you can see what the votes were. You can, if you look down on the bottom, you can see to the right, you can see audio and video. You can watch these things live, or you can see recordings. It's kind of C-SPAN for Florida. Now, I'll tell you what, might sound boring, but occasionally it gets kind of Jerry Springerish. It's very interesting. So, but I find that stuff fascinating. All right, so when is action required? I talked about all these bills that will get filed. So there's way too many for the legislature to consider. But if a bill gets added to an agenda in a committee, that is our wake-up call, because a lot of times the chair will sit there and say, hey, talk to the other lawmakers, how are you guys going to vote on this? How are you feeling about it? And if he gets more yays and nays, a lot of times they'll add it on. So if you see it on the agenda, there's a chance that it could get pushed through, and it is time to wake up, time to contact the elected officials and really make your voice heard. Let's see. All right. So I know that's a lot, right? Not everybody. We have a lot going on, in our lives. All kinds of stuff. I know I'm always exploring Florida, so that is a lot. Having to chase down bills, find out which ones out of the hundreds that are filed, or I should say thousands, I think, that are filed, which ones are important. Conservation groups make it easy. You got to find one that aligns with your values. Obviously, you folks are aligned with the Florida Native Plant Society, who does some excellent work. But yeah, that is important. If you find one that aligns with your values, they will, they will actually represent, almost not represent you, but represent their goals. And if they're in advocacy, they will let you know, hey, what bills are harmful and then what's going on with them and what you got to do. So I depend on conservation groups heavily for my information. And when I say all that glitters isn't green, some of these conservation groups are more cozied up with the state, and that might be okay. It might be your flavor. My litmus test personally is any of them that did not oppose the Florida State Park development plans. I really look at them suspiciously because I think those were horrible for anybody in the state, and some groups just stay quiet on the issue. So yeah, Florida Native Plant Society, Florida Springs Council, they focus on springs. I like them. I primarily volunteer with them because they fight. They do lawsuits. They oppose legislation. Florida Wildlife Federation, any of the river keepers around Florida, and then the Sierra Club. It's a national group. It does have local chapters. So those local chapters are aligned with your beliefs. Man, definitely hit them up. So why join a conservation organization? They have a network where you're able to quickly disseminate information, get feedback from trusted sources, right? So there's a lot of noise online, and I mean a lot. Sometimes it's not accurate. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's unintentional. But some of you may have seen me talk during the Florida State Park development, like fiasco. And I was seeing a lot of wild information out there, and I really wanted to just state the facts, and that's what I was doing. And then conservation groups will collaborate. So sometimes they'll look for other groups that where they have the same values. If they're about clean water, you'll see a lot of the groups, the river keepers, come together, and they all get together and oppose legislation. So the more groups you have grouping together to oppose this, the more effective. And they will tell their members, hey, this is not cool. We need to act. And then they have some of them have methods to make it easy to contact elected officials. I like action alerts, sometimes form letters, or the ones that tell me, call this number and you can make a difference. So with these conservation groups, looking at what matters, what needs to be acted on, and then providing the means to do that, it makes it easy. So I definitely recommend shopping around, finding the ones that resonate with you, which many of you already have, and then get plugged into them. So how to make a difference? Emails I think are great. They're awesome. They sometimes, even if they're a form letter, it depends on who you're writing to. Some folks they get so many, they're just counting the yays or the nays. Some of them will actually read, but if you do use a form letter, customize the subject at least. I like doing a subject, and if I have the time, I'll write a little paragraph. Call the elected official. If they're on a committee, call them. If it's one that's in your district that's making a decision, call them up. Be nice, right? A lot of times you just get a staff member. You just, I just get on the phone and say, hey, my name is Ryan. I live here in Clay County, and I oppose the auxiliary container bill, and I'm asking, Senator so-and-so, please oppose it as well. Thank you very much. You can be in and out. I have a long commute home because I live out in the sticks, but I work in Jacksonville. So, a lot of times I use my hand-free device and make my phone calls on the way home. It's really nice. But be polite. Early on when I was in advocacy, I would write, kind of professional letters, and they're a little spicy. And I didn't get as much of a great response out of that. I tend not to ever target an elected official because some of them have voted on things that really shocked me, but then turned around and introduced legislation that I thought was very helpful. So sometimes they'll be an ally, sometimes they won't. And also, don't put it off. Okay, I have an incredibly short attention span, and smartphones are always bombarding me with stuff. So if you see an action alert from your preferred organization, right then and there, if you can, especially during this legislative session, things move really fast. For example, right now we have an auxiliary container bill for that's going to be heard in the Senate. If I'm not mistaken, it's on Monday. Right now, I mean, we're trying to get as much traffic to those senators that are considering it, saying this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. We don't want our state to be trashed. So those are, and even when I'm passionate about something, I will find myself, if I don't act on it quick, it'll slip my mind, and then I got to scramble. But emails and calls, they don't take much time at all, but man, they make a huge difference. I mean, if you have something you're very passionate about, less than 5 minutes could make a huge difference in Florida. So I cannot stress that enough. I've been to Tallahassee. I one time last year we went to a senator's office. We were able to meet with a staff member. The senator was stuck in a meeting, and the staff member was like, "All right, I hear you. We get the message. We've been answering emails like all weekend, and the voicemails. Just please stop." And that was the senator that flipped to vote against the rest of her party in that committee and stop that the bad bill. So they do make a difference. I've seen it. Okay, how else to make a difference? Spread the word. We need thousands of people to be dedicated in responding. So once you do it, share it with your friends. Use social media, talk to strangers, whatever whatever you like, but get that out there. There's some things you can do where they have public hearings at a state level issue. They just had one for that injection well that I talked about for a phosphate injecting that hazardous waste underground. Local county commissions, the Florida House and the Senate, you can go to the Florida House. If you look on a committee, see when they're going to have a bill, and you can schedule. You look at their schedule. You can go up there and speak your mind to the senators. Those are all ways that you can make a difference. And if an elected official does something that you like, a good bill, they vote in a manner that you like, let them know. That is important. I did not know that until I went to a advocacy workshop, and there was somebody from Tallahassee saying it makes a difference. And also be persistent and don't get discouraged. And it can get to that point because sometimes things don't always go our way. But if we just give up, that is what special interest, big businesses and developers and everybody else that wants to take away from our environment, that's what they want. Okay, let's see. That was a little too much. Recent confirming events. I already talked about radioactive roads last year. Okay, Senate Bill 1620 didn't go anywhere, but they wanted to start developing, or not developing, but it would put conservation easements on Florida wildlife corridor lands and turn them over to agriculture, which I don't think row crops is good habitat for a lot of our wildlife. So I don't think that is a great idea. And they were all for it. Now they've been quiet this year, but the strength that they were pursuing it, especially our ag commissioner, I think that is just kind of on the back burner. I don't think it's gone away. Florida Clean Beaches Act 2024, the entire legislature, so the House and the Senate unanimously passed a bill that said, hey, if there's a test, like a water quality test at the beach that says that there's unhealthy levels of, say, like fecal coliform bacteria, then what you need to do is you need to close the beach, put up signage, let local news agencies know, and then keep it closed until the tests come back positive. And the governor vetoed that. And I found that particularly disturbing because if I go to the beach, I want to know that it's safe to swim in, and I'm not going to be swimming in fecal bacteria. So, restricting our democratic rights. So you mentioned the right to clean water, right? The clock's ticking. They may sit there and make it much more difficult to get for the people, not the legislature. They can get ballots on. They can get ballots on the. They get ballots for constitutional amendments. They can do that. They want to make it harder for us. So that's one thing that they're doing. State park development plans, we talked about that. Injection mills, already talked about that. Kingston and Belmar developments in Southwest Florida. So if anything tells me that some of our agencies could care less about our wildlife, Kingston and Belmar. So they're Collier County area, want to develop a little over like 3,300 acres of panther habitat. Bad news. And it was sailing through until the federal feds got involved and said, hey, this is wetlands. We're pulling, Florida was able to approve their own wetland permits at the time. It's back in federal hands, which was a good sign. As many of us know, there was an election. President Trump's in office, and he's probably not as environmentally friendly or sympathetic to the wildlife as maybe his predecessor. So that could cause a change, and this could go through. But basically, I think the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service determined that about 10% of the panther population would be killed by the increase in vehicular traffic under these massive developments. That is unsustainable. Our panther populations cannot sustain that. I can't imagine that why another development would be that important. There's no shortage of developments around Florida. There are a shortage of panthers where that's okay. And then we have the DEP refusing to enforce the Springs Protection Act. So that's another one. You can have the law in the books, but if an agency is not going to enforce it, that's another way. And advocating for that right now is usually just supporting the groups that are going suing the agencies or coercing them into doing the right thing. All right, so some of the things we are facing right now, and I did this last week, and there's more to add to it, but I know I've talked a lot of doom and gloom, so I'll put some smiley faces. We got Senate Bill 1822. That's the auxiliary container bill that's going to remove protections of springs. That's coming up next week. Senate Bill 836. So there's a really a senator that I think is really cool, Senator Guillermo Smith, he's in Central Florida. He's put an auxiliary container to allow local governments to decide again if they want to ban maybe straws or styrofoam cups, whatever. And I like home rule. I want my be able to have a say in my local community. So he's doing that. The State Park Protection Act, we talked about that. Permits for drilling, exploration, oil and gas. So as that just got filed, that is aimed at what I talked about along Apalachicola, that would put additional restrictions for oil drilling and exploration, and the appointments to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So basically, FWC commissioners are appointed by the governor. So we don't have anybody that has like really wildlife expertise. They're mostly, I guess, campaign supporters, developers, stuff like that, and they make developer-like decisions. So we'll see. They have a couple things. I try not to demonize them because they have a couple of decisions coming up in May that are very important that I hope they do the right thing on. But this would change how they are selected. So there's a lot of restrictions on that. So it just can't be anybody. All right. So I know that was a lot of information. I tried to make it quick. I know it took up a lot of time, but my main thing is if you enjoy natural Florida, enjoy it now. If you enjoy Split Oak, you got to enjoy it now. You enjoy these springs as they are with, the nutrient pollution, and the, water withdrawals and everything else. When you're there, take a moment to truly appreciate these places because they're probably as good as you're going to see it going forward. So appreciate natural Florida. Okay, so this is some of the stuff I do. I host 2 podcasts. The As Bad as It Is podcast. Now that's basically aimed at Florida advocacy to make the average Floridian a better advocate. I don't know if you can just screenshot this on your computer or your mobile device and use those QR codes. If you want to follow my adventures, I post religiously to Instagram under the Florida Excursionist. And I have a couple friends that I do a Florida recreation and conservation podcast called the Madcaps, where we all road trip around Florida and we talk about our adventures and why it's important to keep our natural environment wild. So thank you very much, Valerie and Jean, and everyone that has attended. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was excellent. If you'll knock off sharing, then Jean can get teed up, and I have a few questions for you from the audience.
All right, let's see. Mouse. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay.
Yeah. So B again asks, are there any other do's and don'ts for how to articulate support or disapproval for a bill, either in writing or in person?
No, I wouldn't say there's just be polite, right? Be professional. Those are the big things that I have. Now, some folks don't abide by that, but legislators don't like to have rotten tomatoes thrown at them. I had one where I did a social media video on his bill, and we agreed to a Zoom meeting, and the legislator he was ready for me to lay into him, but we had a good conversation, and it was friendly. So even though I was very irritated with this bill, I treated him with respect, and I think that's important.
Awesome. And what's your opinion on these, when everybody gets together and they take a bus and they go to Tallahassee for an advocacy day?
Great. I think they're great. I try and do them as often as I can. I have a regular 9 to 5, so it makes it a little bit difficult, but I love going to Tallahassee.
Awesome. Okay, so since you feel that that's a good thing, I also think that's a good thing. I've never done it. Kathleen, I think, yes, Kathleen Greenberg says that the Everglades Annual Action Day is April 7th to 8th in Tallahassee, and the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation is providing a bus at no charge for those who want to advocate for the Everglades. And that's right after our conference. So if you have a lot of time off, you can go join SCCF and Kathleen and head to Tallahassee.
Everglades needs as much help as it possibly can get.
And one last thing, there is a request for your slides.
Okay. Oh, my slides, the whole thing?
They would like to have them.
Yes.
Okay, I can send them to the people that want them if that's
okay. I'll email you the updated version.
Okay, awesome.
I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how to share my screen. It doesn't seem to want to allow that. Is there something?
And you were done.
Well, I couldn't see what was actually shared.
Okay, I can share them for you.
And I really appreciate, that was a great overview, Ryan. There are a couple things I would highlight. You made the point about find organizations that align with your values. This is a Florida Native Plant Society Lunch and Learn, and as the Native Plant Society, we do have some issues that may not rise to be really high priorities for a lot of other organizations. So I do want to place a little bit of emphasis on that, and hopefully Valerie will be able to pull up those slides that I created.
Yep. I just got it started. So the audience won't be able to see you, and you won't be able to see the slides, but I will just try and move them along, and you can let me know if you want me to change the slides better.
Sure.
So they are teed up.
Okay, so I assume you're on the opening slide?
I'm on the opening slide, 2025 legislative session.
Okay. First, I would like to point out that one of the advantages we have as an organization to help mobilize our membership and be effective is that we do have somebody representing us in Tallahassee. Travis Moore, he is our government affairs advisor. That's a title he chose to get away from lobbyist, with which a lot of people have a negative connotation with that. But he is really working hard for us and representing us well, and he makes us a lot more effective in our advocacy. If you could go to the next slide, Valerie. And this is my chance to underscore Ryan's emphasis on that regulation of auxiliary containers. What in the world could be wrong with regulating auxiliary containers? Well, this provides an explanation of what that legislation would actually do. Essentially, provide carte blanche for people to pollute our waterways with more plastic and aluminum cans, and You had mentioned that on Monday, it's actually Tuesday next week, that this bill, Senate Bill 1822, will be heard in the Senate's Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. And so another point to underscore is Ryan made the point, don't delay. And so in this particular case, we are going to be putting together a targeted action alert to members, specifically those who would have as be constituents of vice chair of that committee, Blaise Ngoglia, who represents my part of the state, Pasco, Hernando, Citrus, and Sumter counties, Senator Nick Nasigli, who represents Pinellas, and Gail Harrell, who represents Martin and Palm Beach counties. We want to highlight the importance of those senators. Those are 3 of the 9 members of the committee, because they represent coastal districts, and we think these protections, the ability of local governments to prohibit uses of plastics, et cetera, it's especially important in those areas. We're confident that if we can get these 3 senators to oppose this bill, that it could just die right there in this committee and not advance any further. But again, they meet on Tuesday at 4:00. So if you're signed up to receive our action alerts, if you live in a district served by one of these senators, look for that, and don't delay acting. Make your phone call, send your email. We'll provide that information in the alert, and hopefully this bill can just die next Tuesday if it can't get past this committee and the Senate. Could you go to the next slide, please? This is one that is of special importance to the Native Plant Society. Last year, we supported a bill entitled Mangrove Replanting and Restoration, and that had been sponsored by Senator Garcia. She has reintroduced that bill, only it has expanded and is even better from our perspective. This will really highlight the use of nature-based or green solutions to deal with coastal flooding and protecting of the coastline, so that we don't just count on structural methods like seawalls. And this also includes an analysis of how implementing this bill could actually reduce insurance premiums for Floridians. We know that's a big issue here in Florida. Our policy premiums just go up, up, and up. And we're confident that if we have a really good playbook for how we can address flooding and shoreline erosion through methods other than seawalls, it'll really be effective and helpful. This is one that we're confident it will pass. We supported Senator Garcia's bill last year, and that support, which Travis shared with her, was one motive, we believe, in her reintroducing an even better bill this session. The next slide, please.
That bill's doing pretty well. I've been watching it.
It is, and it seems to have a lot of support. We were disappointed it didn't advance last year, but it's even better bill this year, and it looks like it's poised to really move and become law. So if you're looking at this next slide, this is just the opening to a letter. There were 73 conservation organizations that signed on to this letter, and we are all asking the legislature to budget a minimum of $500 million for land conservation through the Florida Forever program. And there's other parts to the letter about funding for the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, to purchase conservation easements over agricultural land, increased funding for springs restoration. One point I'd like to bring up about this letter is, we are working, I think, more effectively than with other conservation organizations. Ryan mentioned the Florida Wildlife Federation and the Florida Springs Council and the River Keepers and Sierra Club. Every Monday at noon, there are several dozen of us, all those conservation organizations, us and others, that have a Zoom meeting, and we discuss legislation of concern. We identify ways that we can collaborate and be as effective as possible. So I think we really are trying to work together so that our voices are even louder and more effective at achieving the desired results. And that next slide, if you could come to it, I just want to highlight some other things that we're working on. Senator Rodriguez, who is the chair of that Senate Environment and Natural Resources Committee, she is sponsoring a bill, 1142, that would actually make it easier to extinguish conservation easements under very limited circumstances. One of our priorities is to actually make it harder to extinguish conservation easements. And just earlier this week, Travis met with the senator, and she is open to amending that bill to include what we came into the session considering one of our highest priorities, and that's to really make it harder to extinguish conservation easements. We have some specific language for her, and right now we are setting up a conference call where we can speak with the lobbyists who have basically asked Senator Rodriguez to represent their interests, and we think that we can work together with them to make this bill a much better bill that will actually increase protection for lands that are protected through conservation easements. It's far too easy now for those easements to be potentially extinguished. We're also supporting on the national level an effort to get Congress to pass a resolution that would designate April as National Native Plant Month. We think we have a really good chance of that. We were successful in recruiting Representative Soto from the Orlando area to serve as a sponsor of that bill in the House. And I believe that Senator Scott has agreed to sponsor that resolution in the Senate. And so we're confident that when we meet in April for our first in-person conference since 2019, we'll also be able to together celebrate that April will be National Native Plant Month. We're pursuing an increase in funding for the endangered plant conservation research grants. That's something else that Travis is working on diligently. And something else that kind of is invisible that really isn't relevant to the Florida legislative session, we are actively opposing mining for titanium on some lands adjacent to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. That mining would be very damaging to the wetlands in the Okefenokee Swamp and refuge. And those wetlands are the headwaters of both the St. Mary's and Suwannee River system. So that's a threat to the Ogeechee-Tupelo swamps on those rivers. It's a threat to Atlantic sturgeon and Gulf sturgeon. And so we think it's really important, and it kind of slips under the radar because that's being considered in the state of Georgia, but we have already expressed support for bills before the Georgia legislature that would make it much more difficult for that mining to take place. And if you bring up the closing slide, we can just open it up for questions. And hopefully there's still going to be time for a few questions. Valerie?
Yes, we're back. Everybody can see us. And We don't have any fresh questions, but we have one that happened early on in the presentation. Diane Goldberg, a member of ours, asked, she said, biosolids contribute the most to nutrient pollution. Do you like the idea of using biosolid to energy plants instead of land applications?
I definitely don't like them on land. I don't know enough about it for as far as energy plants to speak on it intelligently. I do know in South Florida, they have to get rid of them. They can't spread them around there, just basically due to, they have there's the limestone is much closer to the surface there. So yeah, they ship it up north to Florida where we have to deal with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, there could be a place for land application, but the problem is that we would need to really identify those areas and prohibit it elsewhere, where it would just be another source of nutrient pollution to springs, for example. So Ryan's point about, in South Florida, it's those lands would just be too vulnerable to more pollution if it was applied to land surfaces there. It's a sticky issue, but another important one.
Yeah. I did think of a thought for someone who's speaking to a representative. A mistake that I've made really often is not stating clearly what item you're taking a position on and what you want them to do, like early on in the conversation, because you are hyped up, you're making this phone call, this is maybe the most stressful part of your day, and you know exactly what you're talking about. But the representative has no idea who you are, they have no idea what you want, and if you start, and you're a little upset, right? So you're like, why would you consider voting on this bill? No. You still haven't said what bill you're talking about. And so just introducing early on, I'm speaking about this bill number, I would like you to blah, blah, and then go on with why.
One thing I do, because I can fall into that myself, because sometimes it is a little bit nerve-wracking, but closing, I usually try and close with, I'm asking you to oppose or support bill, so-and-so. The other thing that Gene mentioned as well, as far as the conservation easements, if you're listening to the legislators talk and they use this word called surplus lands, so they're going to surplus lands. That's not good. That means these lands are surplus, and they say we have conservation easements on them. They're protected now, but they're extra. We don't need them. They're not that important, so we need to get rid of them. If you say, "Hey, we're going to surplus lands," that's the key word to like raise your eyebrows and go, "Whoa, this is not good."
Yeah, they'll use terms like that to. Surplus doesn't sound like a bad thing. They're not clearly saying we're going to sell off conservation lands that we protected through Florida forever, which is that might trigger a little more of a reaction in people than surplus lands. Yeah, surplus makes it sound like they're extraneous and unneeded.
Didn't they? That's what they when they sold the Withlacoochee land swap. Didn't they say they wanted to surplus the lands, basically, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes.
So since people are probably pretty excited, they won't want to take an action. So I'm going to propose the first action they take is sign up for Florida Native Plant Society's action alerts.
Please, yes.
Post the link to the chat.
If they aren't.
Yeah, if you're not already signed up. And then...
So, sorry, go ahead.
Then maybe the Florida Springs Council action alerts.
Sure. Yeah, because the Florida Springs Council does things a little bit more than just, springs. They do all kinds of stuff. The Florida Native Plant Society, I'm not signed up for action alerts, but I think I will be now. Can you tell me about them? Do you send like can you just tell me a little about how that action alert process works?
Sure. Well, we don't send out nearly as many as the Springs Council. We try to be pretty selective and hope that by being selective, when our members who are signed up to receive those receive one, they'll take it pretty seriously. I guess I have a fear that if we send out one every week, people, there's another one, and maybe put off thinking about it, or so we try to be pretty selective, and especially target those where maybe the Native Plant Society is the one that's most affected or most opposed or most in support of. And we really do, getting to Valerie's point, the bill number, what it's entitled, what it really does, some bullet points, and provide the contact information. If there are particular legislators that we're highlighting, provide their email address and office phone numbers, and really hone in on what that message really needs to be, because you'll often only have a minute. And usually you're not going to speak with the legislator. You'll be speaking with a staff person. And sometimes you'll have to leave a recording. So that makes it especially important that when you make that phone call, if you get a recording, that you can say, I oppose House Bill such and such, on this basis, please ask the senator or representative to oppose or support that particular bill. You need to be prepared to do that.
One area, I'm sorry, go ahead, Gene.
Well, go ahead, please.
Okay. One thing I've noticed with some action alerts that I've dealt with is you'll have those two companion bills as they advance through the committees, and that can generate multiple action alerts for the same issue because each committee has to be contacted if that is how they're set up with the organization that you're advocating with. No, Florida Springs Council will just target one committee at a time. So the single-use plastics bill, HB 565, that unfortunately passed. So everybody that made a phone call or emails for that one, it's going to a new committee. It's going to require more another set of action alerts regarding the same issue. And if it dies in one, like in the House or the Senate, you're gonna have to defeat that companion bill. So yeah, one issue can generate a number of opportunities or needs to contact our elected officials. So in committee, one phone call would definitely needs to be. Each committee needs to generate a second one to be effective in reaching those elected officials that are considering it. If that makes sense.
Yes.
So are there any
I would like to go ahead, Valerie.
Are there any action alerts that people should be taking action on today?
Just the one that I'm really focused on keenly is the auxiliary container bill, the one that a Native Plant Society is generating. I get my bills mixed up, so that is coming on Tuesday. So you're ideally want to get everything in by Monday, close of business, right? So that's usually the deadline. So when when their staff members are processing everything on Monday morning, they have an idea of how, what the temperature is among their constituents. So that's really important.
And that's, Valerie, why you should look for a couple hours after we conclude here. I'll be sending you an action alert to send out to, and again, we're probably just going to target, our members in certain pivotal districts.
Mm-hmm.
There is another bill I would like to bring up. I have notes on that is not on anybody's radar, but I think would be pretty meaningful to Florida Native Plant Society members. This was brought to our attention by David Perkey. He's president of our Pinellas chapter and a member of my policy and legislation committee. But this is Senate Bill 724 by Martin and House Bill 599 by Cobb. It's entitled the Fallen Tree Act. It's very short, but not sweet at all. If you have a tree that on your property and it falls and damages your neighbor's property, maybe their home, their property insurance would be, it would fall on them to apply to their homeowner's insurance, unless there's negligence on your part if you have a sick or diseased tree, and it makes sense. We should be responsible for trees on our property that are sick or damaged and could damage our neighbor's property, and that's an existing law. What this law would do is just negate any demonstration of negligence. If there is a tree on your property and it damages your neighbor's property, then you are on the hook to cover those damages. And so our fear is this is just, if you have a tree on your property that could conceivably, if a hurricane blows through and it lands on your neighbor's house, you'll be on the hook for those damages. And it's basically a signal call to everybody to go out and take out your trees. If there's any chance at all that a tree could damage your neighbor's property, get rid of it. That's pretty disturbing to me. So that's one that we'll probably be bringing to our members' attention. It's one I've brought up during those conservation lobby calls on Mondays, and hopefully we'll be able to just kill that. It's kind of over the top and under the radar. And Ryan brought up the springs protection rule, and we're actually very involved in that with the Springs Council and Ryan Smart, to the extent that I was one of 10 people who signed affidavits asserting that the Florida Springs Council should have standing to challenge DEP on their failure to adopt that rule, what they call the Springs Harm Rule. And they have released some action alerts about that here recently. Well, DEP is not going to go down without a fight. They are going down, kicking and screaming, to the extent that all 10 of us who signed those affidavits were deposed by DEP this week on Wednesday. And now that in itself is not sufficient to demonstrate that the Springs Council, Florida Springs Council, should have standing to challenge DEP on a Springs Harm Rule. If they don't have standing, I don't know who does. But we might all be required to go to Tallahassee next week to actually testify again as to why the Springs Council should have standing on this issue. So, I mean, that just goes to show, I think that the state is making it really hard. They're making it harder for us at every turn to try to advocate to protect the environment. And and that just underscores the importance for our members to add their voice to ours. We can have an impact, but it's nothing like if a dozen or 100 of our members call their legislators and add their voice to ours. It's like the ultimate megaphone. It's much easier for them to dismiss me speaking individually than it is for a large number of our members, especially when they're constituents and they're contacting their own representative or senator. That's the most powerful thing we have going for us. So those action alerts, when we ask you to send those emails or make those phone calls, it is really critically important, and it can make all the difference in the world as to whether we'll be effective or not, successful or not.
Wow, I can't believe you got deposed.
Pardon me?
I can't believe you got deposed.
I was kind of shocked, yes.
I'm sure DEP would like it if no one had standing to challenge these rules.
Yeah. They're like you said, kicking and screaming. This is the organization that's responsible for protecting the springs, primarily.
There's that. It's kind of an old one now, but DEP is don't expect protection.
Yeah. Right. This is just like the rest of the agencies, right? You've got these fabulous staff people doing getting paid pennies and doing this amazing work on the ground, and then you have administration and leadership just don't expect protection.
And that is an important distinction. I mean, DEP is chock full of people who are really committed to protecting our environment. But it does come down to the leadership.
Yeah. I mean, there's, like every state park ranger is a DEP employee. So it's a lot of them work very hard and are poorly compensated.
Yeah.
Yep. The Greenway, the entire Greenway is DEP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and all those state park rangers, other staffers were not asked what they thought about building golf courses at Jonathan Dickinson or putting resort hotels in some of our coastal state parks. You know, it's, yeah.
I volunteer with Florida State Parks, and maybe I'm definitely not saying yes, but possibly when I was really heavily engaged in fighting that, some of them may have whispered in my ear that way to go. But yeah, it was. I think everybody was shocked. So it was. I believe that our park rangers, in large, are very dedicated to our environment, and if the DEB does things that are not great, they should not be held accountable by the public. That's so.
Yeah.
In short, be nice to them.
Well, we are like pretty far over time, so I'm going to let everybody get back to their Friday, but this was a fabulous discussion, and thank you so much for coming on, Ryan, and Jean, again, for just showing up tirelessly and dealing with being deposed and still getting these letters out. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a whirlwind when the legislature's in session. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for the invite. I really enjoyed myself. Jean, I hope to meet you finally in person, maybe in Tallahassee. I've crossed paths with Valerie, fortunately. So, but yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Likewise, I look forward to tuning into some of your podcasts.
All right. Happy Friday, everybody. See you next time.
Take care.